The village of Aldenmere had learned, over many years, to keep quiet when the wrong people were in the room. Mrs. Tove had learned it first. She had served the kitchens at Alworth House for 31 years, and she had watched a great many powerful men come through those doors, men with drivers and lawyers, and the particular stillness of those who never needed to raise their voice. She knew how to read the temperature of a dining room from the sound of the silver being set. She knew which guests required extra candles and which required no eye contact at all. She had, in all those years, learned to keep her head down and her opinions behind her teeth. So when word came that Callum Drest would be arriving on Thursday, that Callum Drest, the one the county papers called the Northern Operator, the man whose reach extended far enough that 3 separate county councils had thought twice about crossing him, Mrs. Tove had set her staff in their proper places and told them all the same thing she told them every time. Eyes forward, hands busy, say nothing that doesn't need saying. What she had not told them about was Nesta Gale. That was because she wasn't certain she understood Nesta Gale herself. The girl was a land registry clerk from the village, 26 years old, the sort of person a room forgot as soon as she stepped into it. She wore the same dark coat every time she came to Alworth House, carried a worn leather satchel, and spoke in the measured, unhurried manner of someone who had spent years learning to make words count. She had first appeared at the kitchen door 18 months ago, asking Mrs. Tove whether she might check the old estate ledgers in the back store. Some discrepancy she was trying to resolve for a farmer who believed his wage record had been altered. Mrs. Tove had let her in. She didn't know why, except that the girl had looked at her directly and asked plainly, without flattery or apology, and that had been enough. She had not expected her to come back. Nesta had come back 37 times. She had never made a fuss about it. She came in the early mornings before the house stirred, and she sat in the storeroom with the estate ledgers spread around her and a notebook open on her knee, and she worked in silence until Mrs. Tove brought her a cup of tea. She never took anything that didn't belong to her. She never spoke about what she was finding, except once, 6 months ago, when she had looked up from a column of figures and said, very quietly, that it was remarkable what a skilled hand could do to a wage record if no one was paying close attention to the receipts. Mrs. Tove had understood then what the girl was doing. She had not said so. On the Thursday that Callum Drest arrived, Nesta came to the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning and asked whether Mrs. Tove might allow her to serve at the dinner that evening. "You're not a server," Mrs. Tove said. "No," Nesta agreed, "but I've watched you do it often enough." Mrs. Tove looked at her for a long moment. The girl's hands were steady on the leather satchel. Her coat was freshly pressed. She had the look of someone who had made a decision several weeks ago and had simply been waiting for the right moment to act on it. "You'll serve the dessert course," Mrs. Tove said, "and nothing else." Callum Drest arrived at midday in a black car with 2 men who said nothing and watched everything. He was taller than the newspapers suggested, with the kind of self-possession that took up space without announcing itself, the way a ship's anchor holds without moving. He walked through Alworth House without looking at the portraits on the walls or the flowers on the hall table, which told Mrs. Tove that he had been inside rooms like this before and was not impressed by them. He shook Harwick's hand at the door. Harwick, that was the other name Mrs. Tove had learned to keep behind her teeth. Reginald Harwick had been the estate's land agent for 9 years. He was the sort of man who smiled at everyone above him and spoke through his nose at everyone below, and he had run the estate's accounts with a smooth and comfortable confidence that Mrs. Tove had always found slightly too smooth and slightly too comfortable. The farmers in Aldenmere had grown quieter over the years. 3 had sold their holdings. 2 more had asked her, when they came to deliver produce, whether she had ever noticed anything irregular about the way the wage settlements were handled. She had told them to speak to someone with the authority to act on it. She had not known at the time who that someone might be. Drest's people settled into the house. The dinner was set for 7. Mrs. Tove's kitchen ran like the inside of a good watch, every course timed, every temperature held, every plate sent out the way it needed to go. She watched through the pass-through window as the dining room filled, and the conversation between Drest and Harwick turned to the business at hand. The transfer of a parcel of land at the estate's eastern edge, currently occupied by 4 farming families whose tenancy arrangements had, according to Harwick's account, been mis-recorded. Drest listened. He did not speak much. He had a way of sitting very still that made people fill the silence with words they hadn't intended to say, and Harwick, to his credit, seemed to know this and managed himself carefully. Still, Mrs. Tove could see from her vantage at the pass-through that Harwick's confidence was the kind that needed an audience to hold its shape. Without an audience he would have been a smaller man entirely. She sent Nesta in, with the dessert at 8:30. The girl moved through the dining room the way she moved through the storeroom, quietly, without drawing attention to herself, her hands exact and unhurried. She set the plates. She poured. She cleared the removed courses from the sideboard. Harwick did not look at her. 2 of his associates were watching Drest and did not look at her either. Drest looked at no one. And then, as Nesta moved past his chair on her way back to the kitchen, she set a slim folder of papers face down beneath the edge of his dessert plate, a movement so small and so practiced that Mrs. Tove was the only person in the room who saw it. The girl did not slow. She did not look at him. She walked back through the service door and pulled it closed behind her without a sound. Mrs. Tove found her in the kitchen corridor a moment later, her hands folded over the empty satchel, her face composed. "Whatever happens," Nesta said, "the records are accurate. I can account for every figure." Mrs. Tove did not ask her how long she had been reconstructing the ledger from the wage receipts. She already knew the answer. 3 years. The girl had been doing it for 3 years. She sent her home before 9, and did not tell her to wait for news. Some things asked more patience than a single evening could hold. What Mrs. Tove saw through the pass-through at 9:20 was this. Callum Drest turned the folder over. He read the first page. He turned to the second. He did not hurry. His expression did not change, but his right hand went very still on the table in a way that made Harwick, who had been speaking about the eastern parcel, stop mid-sentence. "Forgive me," Drest said. "I have a document I need to review this evening before we continue." He said it pleasantly. There was nothing in his voice to alarm anyone. But when Harwick's associate reached across the table and said lightly that perhaps the documents could wait until morning, Drest raised his eyes from the page and said nothing at all, and the associate did not speak again. The dinner ended shortly after 10. Mrs. Tove did not sleep. She made herself tea at midnight and sat in the kitchen with the lights low and listened to the house settle around her, the way she always did when something important was happening inside it. She heard the sound of movement from the east wing at 1 in the morning, boots on the floor, the brief low exchange of 2 voices, a door, then quiet again. At 6 in the morning, one of Drest's men came to the kitchen and asked for coffee and toast, and told her, in the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting the weather, that Mr. Harwick would not be joining the household for the continuation of discussions, and that a representative from the county compliance office would be arriving at 9. Mrs. Tove poured the coffee and did not say anything. She had 31 years of practice. Nesta came back at 7, as she always did. She had her coat and her satchel and the look of a woman who had expected to wait longer. Mrs. Tove let her in through the kitchen door and told her to sit down, and brought her tea without being asked, and then went back to her pastries. At 8:30, Callum Drest came into the kitchen. He came alone, which was the first thing Mrs. Tove noticed. Not his men, not a lawyer, not anyone, just himself, in the same dark suit he'd arrived in, which he had clearly not slept in. He stopped inside the doorway and looked at Nesta where she sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded around her cup. 3 years, he said. It was not a question. He had, evidently, read the folder carefully enough to understand the scope of what was in it. Nesta looked up at him. The receipts were scattered across 4 different filing systems, she said. It took time to cross-reference them properly. You had no authority to demand the records. No, she said. I used the ones I could access lawfully. The correlations are in the margin notes. You can verify every figure independently. He was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Tove kept her eyes on her work and her ears on the room. The farmers whose wages were shorted, he said. Do you have those figures itemized? Tab 4, Nesta said. 3 years of underpayment to the penny for 11 families. The methodology is explained at the front. Something shifted in the man's face, not warmth, exactly, not yet, but the particular expression of someone encountering a quality they had stopped expecting to find. He came a step further into the kitchen. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, not as someone claiming the room, but as someone asking for a moment of it. The compliance officer arrives at 9, he said. I'll need you to walk them through the documentation. I can do that, Nesta said. After that, I'd like to speak to you about a position. The estate will need a proper account supervisor going forward, someone who can't be managed. He said it plainly, without flattery, the way he might have quoted a figure. I'm not asking you to decide this morning. I'm asking you to consider it. Nesta was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, thinking, which was a different thing entirely. I'll consider it, she said, on the condition that the first work of the new accounts is the restitution of the farmers' wages, all of it, all 11 families. That was already decided, Dress said. She looked at him directly, the way she had looked at Mrs. Tove 18 months ago in the kitchen doorway, without apology, without flattery, without the particular careful distance most people kept with men like him. Then I'll consider it seriously, she said. He almost smiled. It arrived at the corner of his mouth and stopped just short of completing itself, but Mrs. Tove, who had watched men sit at tables in this kitchen for 31 years, caught it. He stood. He thanked Nesta by name. He thanked Mrs. Tove also by name for the coffee, which she had not yet offered him but which she poured now without comment, and he took it back toward the east wing where his men were assembling the morning. The kitchen was quiet. Mrs. Tove set a second cup down in front of Nesta and refilled her tea. 3 years, the girl said softly, not to anyone in particular. She was looking at the folder on the table with the particular relief of someone setting down something very heavy. Yes, Mrs. Tove said, and then, because she had 31 years of keeping her opinions behind her teeth, and this seemed like the morning to spend one of them, she added, You should have done it sooner. Nesta looked at her. There was no one with the authority to act on it, she said. Mrs. Tove thought about this for a moment, about the long run of years, and the farmers who had grown quieter, and the man who had just walked out of her kitchen carrying a cup of coffee she hadn't offered him, already on his way to setting something right. No, she said, but there is now. She went back to her pastries. Nesta sat with her tea in the early morning light and turned the folder over in her hands slowly, once, like someone closing a chapter. Mrs. Tove did not watch, but she kept the memory of that morning for the rest of her time at Alworth House, and when she was asked, in later years, whether she had ever seen anything that surprised her, anything, in 31 years of powerful men coming through those doors, she would always pause before she answered. And she would say, once, yes. A girl in a dark coat who had been patient enough for 3 years and brave enough for one evening, and a feared man who had been smart enough to read what she placed in front of him and decent enough to do what it required. That, she would say, had been enough, more than enough. It had been the whole of it.